Welcome to Photoshop Graphic Design and Photo Editing Training course. This course is designed for your ultimate mastery of the world's most powerful image editing software. You have me, a seasoned instructor with many years of experience in digital art and programming. I have taught thousands of students, both on-site and online. This course is for beginners and is a project-based learning, so you don't need any previous knowledge in photography or design. You will learn how to use the different tools in Photoshop, how to enhance images, change colors, how to make selection and combine images. Then work with text, create beautiful flyers. You will learn how to remove objects, how to mask images, distort and manipulate images. You will learn how to retouch and heal like a pro. There are exercise files you can download so you can work alongside with me. There are also assignments so you can practice your skill. By the end of this course, you have the option to become a web designer without any coding, or you can focus on graphic design by creating beautiful flyers, banners, and so much more, or even a retoucher. So, what are you waiting for? Let's get started and master Adobe Photoshop. See you in the class.
Whenever you open up Photoshop, you have the option to create a new document or to open an existing document or image from your computer. So if I want to create a new document, I'm going to click on the button Create New, or I'll simply go to File and then click on New, and then the new document window will pop up. Now on the new document window, you can see some predefined or some presets set by Photoshop. You can see the photo, print, art, illustration, and all of that. Now all these predefined sizes can also be adjusted. For example, I can enter my own width and then height. And here also you have the option to name or rename your document. And then the units are, we have the pixels, inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, and so on. You also have the option to choose whether you want it to be portrait or landscape. And then by default, the resolution is set to 300. And then the color mode is always set to RGB by default. We have other color modes, but the RGB is by default and is supported by many devices. And then the background is always set to white by default. So for this example, I'm going to select the default Photoshop size, and then I'm going to click on Create. And here we have our document window. Now on this document window, you can see we just have one tab. So these are our tabs. Each document you create or open will be listed on this tab. So you can see that this is untitled. For example, if I want to save this file, I'm going to go to File and then click on Save As. Now on Save As, you can see I have the option to rename this file. So for this example, let's call it my first file or image. And then we have different formats just below that. Save as type, so we have by default is set to Photoshop PSD, which stands for Photoshop document. So as a beginner, you may want to leave this as Photoshop document, so we can always come back to make some changes. but we have other options to choose from. So if I click on it, you can see the drop down of different formats we can choose from. So for now, I'm going to leave it as PSD, and then I want to save this on my desktop, and then click on save. And then it says my first image already exists, so I'm going to click on yes to override this. Let's suppose I want to bring in an image on this canvas. So I'm going to go to File and then Place Embedded. If I click on Place Embedded, and I'm going to my photo lessons, which you will find, this is going to be our exercise file, which you will find in this section of video. So I'm going to go in there, and then let's select an image, and then I'll click on place. Now you notice that the image, when placed, will try to fit on the canvas. And then once an image is placed, we also have the option to resize it. So you can see if I move my mouse to the corner of the image or the edge, you can see I have the ability to or the option to resize this. So you can see I can drag it and then it will be resized. So once I'm okay with that, I will click on this icon, which is to commit my transformation. So actually what I've done is to transform it from this size to this size. So I'll click on this and then it will be resized. Now you also observe that it has created a new layer. Now we'll talk about layers in details in future lectures. So we have the first layer as a background layer, and then we have the newly placed image as the layer on top of the background layer. I can also bring in another image by going to File and then Place Embedded. This time let's just select this, and then I will resize it, then click on this to commit the changes. Then I also have the option to move this. So with my move tool selected, I can click on this and then move it. You can see it's equally created a layer. So everything in Photoshop is about layers, which we are going to talk about in future lesson. Aside from placing images, we can also open an image, and let's see how that behaves. So if I go to File, so instead of Place Embedded, I'm going to go to Open, and then let's open this image. So here you can see that an opened image will open in a new tab, and I can toggle or switch between these tags. In this movie, we are going to talk about the different parts or the main parts of Photoshop. Here at the top, we have the menu bar, and below the menu bar is the options bar, and below the options bar we have the different tabs we can toggle or switch from. And then in the middle we have the document window. Then on the left we have our toolbar, and you can see we have different toolbar. Now on this toolbar you can see an arrow pointing downward. This means that there are sub toolbar in each of these. So if I click and hold my mouse, you can see it's going to reveal other tools in this, or you can right click and then you can see other tools. And then on the right we have the panels. By default, this is the panel you will see when you open up Photoshop. Now some panel may be hidden and some may not. For any reason you are not seeing the panel you want, you can simply go to Window and then toggle between this. For example, if I want to bring in the adjustments, if I click on it, and then you can see the adjustment panel. And if I want to close it, I'll go to Windows and then click on it, and then it will be off. In the previous movie, one of the tools that I have introduced you into was a move tool. You'll note that the option bar is based on the different selected or currently selected tool. For example, if I select the move tool, you can see the option bar, and the option bar changes if I select the next tool, for example, and here you can see that. If I keep selecting, you can see the option bar is changing based on the currently selected tool. You also have the option to choose whether you want your toolbar to display in 2 columns or in 1 column. For any reason you want to reset your toolbar, you can click on this drop down icon and then go to the settings, and then you have the option to reset all tools. Then on the document window, you can also customize the color. For example, if I right click on the document window, and then I have the option to select a darker color or a dark gray, a medium gray, the light gray, or a custom one. But for this lecture, I'm going to leave it at default. You also have the option to change the entire interface by simply going to Edit, the Preference, and then the Interface. On the interface, you can choose the different color theme provided by Photoshop. For example, if you want a more darker interface or color theme, I'll select this, and you can see the changes, or this, or a more brighter color. So I'm going to leave it at default, or I'll simply click on cancel. Then on the panels, I have the option to switch between panels, or I can drag each panel and turn it into a floating panel. I also have the option to resize the panel, or to go to the menu and then close the panel. So for any reason you have closed your panel, you can easily go back to Windows and then select the panel you want to open. For example, I want to open the adjustment panel, and here we have it. We also have the option to turn this panel by moving it away into an iconic panel. So in this way, I can click on this and then it opens up, and then if I click on it, it closes. I can adjust my panel to a bigger size and so on. You can also create a new workspace by clicking on this icon, and you can see that the workspace, when you open up Photoshop, is always in Essential. For any reason some things are not working right, you can click on Reset Essential, and you will see the basic panels and the basic settings of Photoshop. In this movie, we are going to look at some common navigations in Photoshop. First, we are going to look at the zoom tool. So here on the toolbar, if I click on the zoom tool, and here I can zoom in just by clicking on the image, and then if I want to zoom out, I will hold down my Alt and then I'm going to zoom out or zoom in. So whichever, we have the option. If I hold the option, I can zoom out or zoom in, and then we'll have the option, the Alt key, to zoom out. If I hold Control and then 0, this is going to fit the image on the screen. Or I can simply hold Control and then the plus key to zoom out, and then the minus to zoom in. So again, if I hold Control and 0, and this is going to fit to screen. Or I can simply zoom out by moving to the right, and then if I move my mouse to the left, and this is going to zoom in. So again, Control and 0 is going to fit to the screen. We have another option which we can find on the window menu and then the navigator. And here on the navigator's panel, we can zoom in and out on the navigator panel. So I'm going to close this, and then I'll hold Control and 0 to fit to the screen. Next, we have a keyboard shortcut that can turn off the toolbar on the left and then the panels on the right, and which is the tab key. So if I click on the tab key, and here you can see we can toggle off and on the panels on the right and then the toolbar on the left. So these are the few keyboard shortcuts I want to bring to our notice. We will learn more as we study along. In this movie, we are going to talk about the crop tool, and you can find this by clicking C on your keyboard or by clicking on the crop tool on the left toolbar. Now once the crop tool is selected, you see a bounding corner around it, and I can click on the corners and then drag it. And after that, you can equally click on the body of the image to move it around. And once you think you are okay with this, then you can click on the icon to commit your changes, and your image will be cropped. If I want to go back or to undo my changes, I can go to the edit and then undo crop, and this will return back to the original image. We have a non-destructive way of cropping images. Now once you have your crop tool selected, here I can untick the delete cropped pixels. So if I untick it and then I crop my image, so if I click on the icon to commit the changes, it won't delete the outside details of this. So if I do that now, I'll commit the changes. Because I have that untick, I can click again and then make modification on the crop tool. So this is a non-destructive way of cropping, which is recommended. In this movie, we will be looking at layers. Layers are very important features of Photoshop and other Adobe applications. Layers enables us to work non-destructively, and then it also allows us to move things and objects around our workspace. Also helps us to select and work with images separately. In order to demonstrate this, I'm going to close a current window, and then I'm going to open an image again. So I'll go to open, and then I'm going to select this. Now each time you open up an image or document in Photoshop, Photoshop assigns that to a background layer. Likewise, if I close this again, and then now I want to create a new document, and I'm going to leave this as the default Photoshop size, and then click on create. So you also notice that whenever you create a new document, Photoshop assigns that to be a background layer, which is white, though we can equally change this to any color of our choice. For any reason you want to move the background layer around, you can't move it unless you unlock the lock icon. So if I click on this, you can see that the lock is off. So right now I can now move a background layer. So right now our layer has been turned to a normal layer. So for any reason you want to turn it back to a background layer, you will simply go to layer and then click on new, and then on the drop down I'm going to click on background layer, and this will turn it back to the original state. And at this point you can move this around, and when I try to move it around, I will get a notification that this layer has to be converted to a normal layer for me to move it around. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back to a normal layer, and I'm going to place images on top of this background layer or normal layer. Let's see how things works. So even as it is on the background layer, I can equally bring up an image and place on the background layer. For example, if I go to file and then place embedded, and right now I'm going to place this image, and then I'm going to resize it to a size, and once I'm done I'm going to click to commit the changes. I notice I have another layer from the placed image. So whenever you place an image on top of each other, it's going to create a layer. So everything in Photoshop is about layer. Even when you bring up a shape, which we are going to talk more about shapes in future lecture, is also going to create a layer for us. So right now I'm going to bring up another image by clicking place embedded, and this time I'm going to bring let's say the boxer dog, and then I'm going to resize it to my preferred dimension, and then I'm going to click OK. You notice that the boxer dog layer is on top of the black and nut bolts on red, and then is also on top of the background layer. I can move these layers around. For example, if I click on this, I can I can click and hold my mouse and then move it to the top, and you can see that it's now on top of this. Another thing I can also do is, if I double click on this, I can equally rename my layer. So for example, I can call it red, and then if I click on this, let me modify it. Maybe I'm going to call it dog. Now these layers can also, I can also grab my move tool and then move these layers around, and you notice each object I select on the workspace will equally be selected on the layer. So if I select this, this will be selected. So these are the basic things we need to know about layers for now. We'll learn more about layers as we study along. In this movie, we're going to look into the layers panel. Now on the right side, you have the layers panel, and below that we have some icons. Now once you click on this icon, you can create a new layer. So whenever you want to add something to your existing layers or on top of your layers, you can easily click on this and it will create a new layer. But before I do that, I would love to select this so that when I click on it, it's going to create a layer on top of this. So I click on this and you can see that an empty layer is created. There is an invisible layer showing right now, and that is why you are seeing this icon. You can see the fill is empty. So let's say I want to fill up this layer by going to edit and then the fill, or you can hold Shift F5 as a keyboard shortcut, or just click on fill. And right now I'm going to select a color. Let's say I want to fill this. I'll select a color and let me go with this. So I click OK and OK, and then you can see that the layer has filled up our entire image, and that is because it's on top of the other layers. So if I click on this, if I hold down Ctrl T, I can easily transform this, and then you can see the other layers. You can see that, and once I'm done, I will click OK to commit the changes. So the same thing you do with other layers, you can equally do with this. So I can move it around. I can equally bring this down below, and then it will be under the red layer. For any reason I do not want to see this, I can click on this eye icon, which is going to turn on and off the visibility of this layer. So if I click on it, it's going to turn it off, and then I can work on the other layers. If I want to bring it back, I will click and then it will turn it on. Now if I want to delete this layer, I'll click on it and then click on this delete layer icon, and once I do that, and then I will see a dialog box displaying delete the layer. Are you sure you want to delete the layer? And if I say yes, the layer will be deleted. So for now, I'm going to step backward. I want to bring back the layer. I'm going to go to edit, and then undo the delete layer, or just Ctrl Z on your keyboard or Command Z on a Mac. Now there are more things you can do with layers. You can increase and decrease the opacity of any given layer. So make sure your move tool is selected, and then if I select this newly created layer, I can go to the opacity right here and then reduce the opacity. So if I increase it, it's going to bring back the opacity. Now likewise for this, if I click on it, I can turn down the opacity and I'll as well increase it to 100%. In this movie, we are going to be talking about special types of layers and layer styles. Now I'm going to create a new document, and then I'm going to leave it as the default Photoshop size and hit on create. Now, what are special types of layer? Now, apart from bringing and placing images on your canvas, we can also place text on the canvas. Now, for example, if I want to place a text on the canvas, I'm going to click on the text tool right here, and then on the text tool you also have options to select from. So I'm going to select the horizontal type tool, and then I'm going to choose a color from the options bar. I'm going to click and choose a color. Let's say I want something red, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I can start typing. You notice that as soon as I start typing, the type tool is going to create a layer, a separate layer for the type tool. So if I click on it, then here you have lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is a dummy text, and this is just for demonstration on how your text will appear. And here on the layers panel, you can see we have the thumbnail showing that or indicating that this is a layer, a type layer. So right now I can click and then modify this. So let's say I want to type graphics, and here we have it. So once I'm done, I can commit the changes. We are going to talk more about type 2 on a separate section. We have a lot to cover on type 2. Then we have another special type of layer, which is the shape. So if I go to my toolbar, I'm going to click and hold, and then you can see we'll have the rectangle shape, rounded rectangle tool, ellipse, polygon, line tool, and custom shapes. So if I click on the rectangle tool, and then I have my fill as this, then if I drag my mouse, and then you can see a rectangle. The rectangle shape has also created a layer called rectangle 1. So these are special types of layers. So everything you do in Photoshop, as you bring up anything on the canvas, it will create a layer. And as well, I can also embed an image. If I click on this, and this will have my image embedded. Then I'm going to commit the changes. And then below the layers panel, we have the effects. The effects are effects we can apply to our layers or to our individual layers. So once I have my layers selected, all this, or I have this selected, I can simply go to the effects, and then let's say I want to add a stroke. If I click on this, then the stroke properties panel will open, and here you can see we'll have other styles, but you can see that stroke is selected. And here, move this so I can see where I'm applying the stroke to. So now I can increase the size of my stroke. Okay, this is it. So I can increase the size of my stroke, or I can reduce it. So something like this. Then I have the option to select the position, and then maybe also select the color. So for example, I want this color. So for any reason I want to make further modification, I'm going to double click on the stroke, and then I can come back, maybe increase it a bit or reduce it a bit, change the color, the blending mode, and then hit on OK. and then you want to make sure that the preview is selected so we can see our changes live. So we'll talk more about layer styles in a separate section. In this movie, we are going to be talking about the brush tool. Now, the brush tool is very essential to Photoshop, especially if you are an artist or any type of digital artist that uses Photoshop. In order to use the brush tool, you have to click on a brush tool on the toolbar. So if I click on it, or if I hold and click on it, here we have other options, but the first one is a brush tool. So just by clicking on it, you have your brush tool. And then before I can apply my brush, I'm going to set a color, or let's just leave it as this. Now remember, if I hover my mouse on this is a foreground color, so you can set a foreground color by clicking on this, and then you set a foreground color. You can select your color and then you click OK. Then you can equally set a background color. So we have foreground and background color. Once I have my brush tool selected, I can start painting anywhere on the canvas. You also have the option to set the size of your brush by going to the options bar, and then here you have the size. It's set to 13, so I can click on this drop down and then I can increase the size of my brush. So let's say I want to set it to 40 pixels, and then if I brush again, and then you can see the size. You also have the option to increase or decrease the hardness of the brush. So right now the hardness of the brush is set to 0. Now if I increase the hardness of the brush, and then you can see the difference between this, or I can equally decrease brush. You also have a keyboard shortcut to increase the hardness of the brush or to reduce the hardness of the brush. That's to soften the brush, and that is by holding your shift and then your curly braces on your keyboard. If I do that, you can see the changes being reflected at the option bar. So if I click on that, you can see the changes. Now if I drag my mouse here, you can see the hardness, and if I click and hold shift, the opening curly brace, and this will reduce the hardness of the brush. So if I try that, and then you can see that. So now if I increase the hardness of the brush, I want to set it at 100. We can also draw a horizontal or a vertical line with the brush tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and then hold down shift, drag it to the left to make a horizontal line. And now if I want to make a vertical line, I'm going to click again, hold down the shift on the keyboard, drag to make a vertical line. Now we can also connect lines together. So if I hold down my shift and then I can drag, and this will keep connecting lines by clicking and making sure that I'm holding my shift key. We also have different types of brush in Photoshop. So I'm going to remove all of this on the screen. Make sure your brush tool is selected, and then I'm going to click on this, and then here you can see I'm going to expand the panel, the brush panel. If I click on this, it's going to drop down the different brushes we have in the general brushes. So this is a kind of different category of brushes. So we'll have the general brushes, dry media brushes, wet media brushes, special effect brushes, all grouped together. So if I click on the dry media brushes, and here we can see we can select any of them and then apply them on our image. So if I select this, now it's selected, I can drag my mouse and then you can see the effect of this brush. So if I increase the size, and you can see the effect. Now let's go back and explore other types of brushes. If I go to the special effect brushes, and here you can see the different brushes we have or that comes with Photoshop. So if I click on this and then I apply that, and then you see the effect of this. If I increase the size, you see that in action. Now all these types of brushes can be applied to your work depending on what you want to achieve. Let me quickly demonstrate one of the brushes. So I'm going to bring in an image. So I'm going to open an existing image, and this time I'm going to open this image. So and then it opens up in a new tab with that image set to a background layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer so I can apply my brushes. I have my brush tool selected, then I'm going to go to this and then select the spatter brushes. I just want to create some effect. I don't think there is anything special, but just to create some effect. So I'll select this and click to collapse it. I want to make sure that the color of my brushes matches the shoe. So I will click on the eyedropper tool. So select the eyedropper tool and click on the color, and this is going to set the color to the foreground color. So now make sure your brush is selected, your brush tool, and then I can apply the effect. Apply that. There's nothing special, it's just an effect. Then if I want to turn that off, I can just click here and then it goes off. So these are simple ways we can use brush. We are going to look at vector shapes and how to draw them in Photoshop. So here I have the shape tools. If I click on it, here we'll have the rectangle, rounded, ellipse, and so on. So if I grab the rectangle tool, and then maybe I don't want the fill, I want the fill to be none, and then the stroke, which is a line around it on the edges. So let's say I want the stroke to be a size, then I can drag and drop the rectangle shape. Let me increase this stroke a bit. Fine. Now you can see that it has created a layer called a rectangle one, which is a vector shape. So we can resize. One advantage of the vector shape is that we can resize it without losing its quality. And the way you know that this is a vector shape is when you look at the little icon in the thumbnail. This indicates that this is a vector shape. And once you drop a shape, it will automatically open up the properties panel for that shape, and this will work on recent versions of Photoshop. Note, we will discuss this in more details in future lessons. There are more options to shapes. For example, if I click on this and delete, now I'm going to bring in another shape, still on the rectangle shape. I'm going to hold shift, and the essence I'm holding shift, I want to draw a square. So if I hold shift and then drag my mouse, and you can see this will give me a perfect square. Now I can increase my stroke so we can see it clearly. But if I do not hold the shift key and then drag my mouse, this can give me any shape that maybe resembles a rectangle. The same applies for the ellipse shape or tool. So if I click on this and then select the ellipse tool, and then I hold down the shift key on the keyboard, now I'm going to have a perfect circle instead of an ellipse. So if I drag now, you can see I have a perfect circle. But if I do not hold the shift key and then drag my mouse, I will not have a perfect circle. Now these shapes can be selected individually. If I click on the path selection tool, I can click on any of these shapes, and then I want to make sure that the select is on all layers, so that I can move these layers, select it, and then I can move them around. So make sure it is selected, and then you can move it around. I can even make a marquee selection by clicking and holding both, and then I can move them around. I can make more changes or further changes to my shape. So I can make further changes to my shape. For example, if I click on this, which is this, I can choose the fill or the stroke from the option bar, or I can simply use the properties panel. So here on the properties panel, I can expand this. I can equally move it around or drop it where it was, and then I can click on the fill. I can add, let's say I want a fill of red, and then it's going to apply to this and this because it's selected. So I'm going to click on. I can furthermore make adjustments or changes to this shape. So if I select the shape, then I can use the properties panel or the options bar to make adjustment to this. So if I use the properties panel, I can change the fill to something else. So if I click on this, here I can select a color, let's say red, and then the fill I can leave it as black. I can equally increase the fill, the stroke, I can equally increase the stroke. So here we have the stroke and here we have the fill. So this is the fill and this is the stroke. If I do not want a stroke, I can click on this, and this will remove the stroke entirely from the shape. So for now I need a stroke, so I just want it to be black, and then let me increase it a bit. Then you also have the option to select if you want to change your corner radius. You can see that. Let me increase the stroke so we can see this in action. So if I select this, then you can see the stroke is outside. If I select this, it's a kind of inside, and if I select this, then you can see how the different formats of the corner radius. The same also applies for the ellipse tool. So if I hold down the shift key and then I drag my mouse, I'm going to have an ellipse tool. Let me have that in a new layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to select and deselect all layers, so that when I bring in the shape, it's going to appear in a new layer. So here on my ellipse tool selected, so I'm going to hold down the shift and then select and drag, and then I'm going to make modifications. So I want the fill to be red, and then I want the stroke let me increase the stroke a bit. Okay, and then I also have the option to select it to be inside or in the center or in the outside. We can as well change the corners. For example, if I select the rectangle, which is this, I can go to the corner and change the format of the corner, and here we can see the different corners we have in the properties panel. You can further customize the corner. For example, if I deselect all layers and then I'm going to bring in a rectangle shape. So here I'm going to hold down my shift and then drag a rectangle shape. So here I can give it a different color altogether, and give it a color, and then okay, give it a color, this color, fine. Now we can customize the corners. For example, if I drag my mouse to the left or to the right, this is going to change the corners. So if I move to the right, and here you can see that I can adjust the corners. The four corners of this rectangle are linked together. So if I go back to the original 0 pixel and then unlink this, now this is a kind of linking the corner radius all together, the four corner radius together. So if I unlink it, then I can adjust just one side of the corner. You can see, so this represent this, and this represent this corner, and this represent this corner, and this represent this corner. So if I want to make adjustment to this corner right here, I'm going to make use of this and then drag. So we can also merge shapes together. For example, I want to merge this and this shape. So what I'm going to do is make sure my move to is selected. So I'm going to move this shape to this point, and then I want to make sure both of them are selected. So I'll select both of them by holding Ctrl and then selecting both of them, and then there is a keyboard shortcut which is Command E on a Mac or Ctrl E on Windows, and this will merge the shapes together. So now, still on the move tool, I can move them about. I can also work on the shape individually, provided they are being merged, by selecting the path selection tool, and on the path selection tool I can select this and then still move this around. And as well, provided they are both merged together, we can equally make adjustments to the properties. For example, if I want to remove the fill, I can go to the properties, and then the fill, I want to set it to none, and then here we have it. Another type of shape tool I want us to look at is the polygon tool. Now if I click on the polygon tool, I have the option to select the size. For example, if I enter 3, and this will give me something like a triangle. So now if I drag my mouse, but I want to make sure before I do this I don't have any layer selected. So I'm going to go to select and deselect all layers. So right now I'm going to drag in my polygon tool. So if I do that, and then you can see it's like a triangle. So here on my polygon tool, I can bring in my stroke. So I'm going to increase my stroke so I can see it clearly. Then I'll go to my move tool and then move it to wherever I want it. I can equally rotate it. the tool itself, and then I'm going to hold down Ctrl T. So I'll select Ctrl T, and then I want it to rotate in an angle, so instead of something like this. So if I hold my shift, and then this is going to rotate in an angle form without distorting. So once I'm okay with this, I can commit my changes. So if I want more shape, let's say I want the star, I'll go to the settings and then make sure my star is selected. So if I select star, and then I want, like, let's say 10 sides, so right now I can bring in my star just like this. Then I'll go to my move tool and then move it around. And lastly, another important shape tool we are going to be looking at is the custom shapes. So if I click on custom shapes, and then here if I click on the drop down, now I'm going to expand it so we can see more of them. Now these are a set of categories. Now if I go to the settings and then click on all shapes and replace current shape with shapes from all, so if I click OK, and then you can see all the shapes that comes with Photoshop by default. So you also have the option to select the category you want. If I want nature, and OK, and this will display the custom shapes that are related to nature. So I love keeping it in all so I can see all of them. So if I want to bring in any shape to the canvas, I will simply click on the shape. For example, I want to bring this, so I'll click on it, and then I will click anywhere on the canvas. You see a dialog box, create custom shapes, and then click OK. And here we have it. Or you can simply select your custom shape. Now for example, I want to bring in something like this. Then I will make sure I hold down my shift so I don't distort the proportion. So I'll hold down my shift so I don't distort the proportion. So I'll hold down the shift and then drag my mouse, so I will resize it proportionally. So if I release my mouse, and here we have it. So these are different shapes and how we can work with them in Photoshop. We are going to look at them in more details in future lectures. In this movie, we are going to learn how transformation works in Photoshop, together with alignment and distribution. So here I have 3 layers apart from the background layers, and these 3 layers are placed on top of the background layer. Now if I want to move any of these, I can simply click on it and then move them about. And once this is selected, it will equally be selected on your layers panel. Or you can hold down, you can just click on any of the layers, you can move them about. Now let's quickly talk about alignment, aligning layers and distributing them. Now for any reason I have this layer at the top, so I'm going to click and then move it to the top, and then maybe move this more further. And I do not want them to appear in this way. I want them to be aligned. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the 3 of these images, or the 3 layers. So I can simply hold down Command on a Mac or Control on Windows and then select each of the layers. Now I have them selected. I can now use these to align. Now Now on the options bar is the alignment. So we have the first 6 for alignment, and then we'll have the second 6 for distributing. So we'll have 1 2 3 4 5 6 for alignment, and 1 2 3 4 5 6 for distributing. So if I do not want to make selection this way, I can simply click on my marquee tool and then hold down my control on Windows or command on Mac, and then I can drag and select this, and you can see I have them selected. So now, since I want to align them, I can either align top edges or align vertical centers or align bottom edges. We also have align left edges, align horizontal centers, and align right edges. So in this example, I want to align to top edges. So if I click on this, so you can see that it aligns to the topmost. If I step backward again and repeat the process, so you can see this is at the topmost. So it's going to check and figure out which image is at the topmost. So now I still have them selected, so I can simply click on align top edges, and this will align them to same level. Now if I step backward, or I have a shortcut on Windows, Alt, Control and Z. So if I step backward, we also have the align vertical centers. So I click on it, and you can see it will align vertically centered. So if I step backward again and make sure you still have them selected, we also have align bottom edges. So this is like the opposite of align top edges, and it's going to look at the image at the bottom and align to that. So I still have them selected, so I'm going to click on align bottom edges. So if I click on that, and you can see it's well aligned. We also have the align left edges, the align horizontal centers, and all of that. So if I step backward again, and here is the one I often use. So if I say align horizontal centers, then here you can see that. Now let's move over to the distribution icons. Here we have 6 of the distribution icons and then 6 of the alignment icons. In order to demonstrate this, let's deselect all the layers. So I'm going to go to select and deselect all layers. Now I'm going to click on this and shift it a bit. So I'm going to shift it a bit, and here you can see the space between them. We have more space here than this other. So for any reason I have my image in this way, I can distribute it so they can be evenly spaced. So now I'm going to select, I'll hold down my control and select the 3 images, and then I'm going to show you the most common one on the distribution icons, which is distribute horizontal centers. So if I click on this, so you can see that it is being distributed. So the space between this is equal to the space between this. Next, let's talk about transformation. So now I'm going to have one of the layers selected. So I'm going to select, deselect all layers, and then I'm going to have this selected. Here we have an option which is show transform controls, and this is going to create a bounding box around this. But before I click on that, if I want to make a transformation, or I want to transform this image, I'll select it and simply go to edit, and then here we have the free transform, Ctrl T or Command T for Mac. So you can either use the shortcut Ctrl T, or I can simply click on free transform. And then after successful transformation, then I have to accept the transformation or to commit my changes. So right now I'm just going to click on it without transforming. I'm going to click back on the image and then click on show transform controls, so that even before the transformation I can simply see the bounding lines or corners on each of the images. Now in order to transform this, I'm going to click on Ctrl T as a shortcut, and then if I move my mouse to the edges, then you can see this arrow which indicates that I can now transform these images. I can now click on the image and transform it to whatever size I want to. Now, but you notice that by default, when I try to resize this, it will look distorted. So now if I hold down Shift and then try to transform this, then you can see that it transforms proportionally. So make sure you don't forget, if you want to transform without distortion, then you need to hold down Shift and then do your transformation. So once you are done with the transformation, then you can click to commit your changes. So now I'm going to click on edit, and then I'm going to step backward to the original image. Now another thing you can do on transformation, so if I click on Ctrl T again and then I bring my cursor to the edges, I can also rotate this image. So if I click on it, try to rotate the image, here you can see that the image is being rotated. So once I'm done, then I have to commit my changes. Now there is one more thing we need to know. So if I go to edit and then step backward to have the original image, I want to click on Ctrl T to transform again, and then this time I want to hold down my Shift key before I rotate. And if I do that, this is going to rotate the image by about 15 degrees increment. So if I hold down Shift and then try to rotate this, so you can see it's rotating by 15 degrees increments. And this will try as much as possible to maintain the quality of your image. So once I'm done, then I have to commit my changes. So still on the transformation tool, by holding Ctrl T as a shortcut, we can also toggle or switch between free transform or warp mode. So here on the menu bar I have an icon, and this icon is warp mode. So now if I click on warp mode, now the image has switched from free transform to warp mode. Then here I can move things around, which is going to warp my image, and select the corners, then move it around, select it. Then here you can see that around, and once I'm done with that, I can click on the commit changes. But before I do that, we'll still have some other option of the warp mode. Now if I click on this, this is going to drop down some modes like arc, and here we have it. We have arc lower, we have shell upper, we have flag, and so on. So by default is always on custom or on none, and this is the default. So once I'm satisfied, I can simply click to commit the changes. So for now, these are the things we need to know about transformation, aligning, and distributing your images in Photoshop. In this movie, we are going to learn about selections in Photoshop. Using selection in Photoshop is a big part of Photoshop. Now, the question is, why do we need selections? Well, to be able to combine images together or to adjust parts of an image. So, for this example, let's say we want to turn every other part of this image black and white and then leave the focus area uncolored. For example, the focus area is this vehicle right here. So, to be able to do that, I'll have to make a selection on this focus area. So, I'm going to go to the toolbar and then click on the marquee tool. So you can see this is a rectangle marquee tool, or you can hit M as a keyboard shortcut. So if I click on that, and then I'm going to click and drag my mouse just on that selection, and then you can see it is selected. Now for any reason I do not want this selection, I can simply go to select and then deselect. Or if I want to make a selection on the entire image, I'll go to select and then all. You can also inverse your selection. For example, I'm going to select the vehicle right now. I'm going to select the vehicle and then I'll go to select and then inverse the selection, and this will select the opposite of what I already have selected. Then I can simply go to image and then adjustment, and then I'm going to select the black and white adjustment, and here you can see the other parts of the image has been turned to black and white, and then we'll have the focus area still maintaining the color. And here we have some presets which we can adjust. I can also select the tint, and this will make the entire image tint. While the tint is selected, you can also make adjustment to the hue and then the saturation, just like this. Now this is just a basic example of a selection made to adjust a particular area. Now let's try other ways of selection. So I'm going to cancel this, and then I'm going to go to select and then deselect my selections. Now let's look at other ways of selection. So right now I'm going to click on the elliptical marquee tool. If I click on that, and here you can see if I drag my mouse, you can see it's kind of forming an ellipse. So but if I hold on, if I go back to select and deselect and then hold my shift key and then drag my mouse, you can see I have a perfect circle. One thing to note is that once you made a selection like this, you can move the selection around. So here you can see I can also go to the selection menu and click on transform selection, and right here I can adjust and resize my selections. And once you are okay with that, you have to commit or accept your transformation, just like this. Another thing you can do with your selection is that I can add to this selection. For example, if I click on this, and this will add to my selection. Here we have it, and then I can click more, and you can see these are adding to my selection. Or you can subtract from selection by clicking on this, and then if I drag my mouse, and then this will subtract from the selection. If I do that one more time, then you can see it is being subtracted from the selection. And as well, you can also intersect by clicking on this. So if I drag then you can see the intersect. Another thing you can do with selection is that once a part of an image is selected, you can move it around or you can free transform it. Now I'm going to go to select and deselect my current selection, and then right here, let's say I want to make a marquee selection, something like this. I can go to my move to and then move my selection, right? Another thing I can do is to resize my selection. For example, I can resize it and then make it bigger. You can see that. Now this depends on the image you are working on, so it doesn't look distorted. So I'm going to leave it the way it was. So I'm going to commit my changes and then go back to the way it was. Now let's talk about two more important things in selection. We have the feather and the anti-alias. So for this, I'm going to click on file and make a new file. I'm just going to leave it as default. So I'll click on create. So in order to demonstrate what feather and alias is, I'm going to click on the lasso tool. So here we have the lasso tool, which is another type of tool for selection. So if I click on the lasso tool, by default you will see the feather as 0 pixel and then the anti-alias selected. So before I make a selection, I'm going to deselect this, the anti-alias, and then make sure your lasso tool is selected. So I'm going to draw a selection, and then here you notice that my foreground is set to red, to this. So in order to fill up this selection, I'm going to click and hold Alt and backspace, and then you can see I have filled up this. And then before I make the next selection, I'm going to select the anti-alias and then draw another selection, and then I'm still going to fill this with the red color. So Alt and backspace, and then finally I'm going to increase my feather. So let's say I want to increase that to 15 pixels. So let's just say 15 pixels. Okay, then I'm going to draw another selection and then click on Alt and backspace. So then I'm going to click on select to deselect my selection. Now I'm going to zoom so that we can see the difference. So right now I'm going to click on Ctrl and plus on my keyboard, and then hold the space bar, and then I can drag this. You can see that the first selection have a rough edges. So if I hold down my space bar and then let's check the next let's check the next selection, and you can see that the next selection have the anti-alias selected and is much more smoother than the first selection that do not have the anti-alias and feather set to 0. And then we'll have the last selection, which is much more smoother than the first and the second, with the feather set to 15 pixels and the anti-alias is selected. So this is all about feather and anti-alias when you are making selection in Photoshop. Hi there, and welcome to this movie. In this movie, we are going to talk about another type of selection tool, in Photoshop. This selection tool will make selection based on color and contrast on your image. And this selection tool is nothing but the magic wine tool, and you can find out in here, and here we have it, the magic wine tool. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open up an image to demonstrate how these make selections based on color and contrast. So if I go to File, and then I'm going to go to Open, and then select one of the image. So I'm going to select this, and then I'm also going to select, I'll hold down my Control key and select one of these two. So I'm going to open the two images. So here I have this, and then I have this also. So this selection tool will make selection automatically. It's one of the advanced tools we have in Photoshop that makes selection automatically. So now this image, if I zoom in a little bit, and then I'll make sure my magic wine tool is selected. So I'm going to click on this, and here you can see that it made selection based on the color. So it looks at the image and finds similar color to make selection. And again, if I click on this, it's going to find similar color on this area, and you can see this is deselected. So if I want to add to my selection, I'm going to click and hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, and then this will add to my selection once I select this area. Also, if I make selection on this and this, I'm going to add to my selection again by holding down the Shift key and then add to this selection. And here you can see it has also selected similar colors on this area. And then if I do the same thing here, and here we have it, and I can add to this, and then here. So once you've made a selection, you can do whatever with this selection. Let's say I want to change the color. I will simply go to the image and then go to adjustment, and let's say I want to make a simple adjustment by clicking on the hue saturation. And once I do that, I'm going to drag my panel off so I can see what's going on, and then on the hue I can change the color of this. So for now I'm going to cancel this, and then let's move over to the next image. So if I click on this image and make sure your magic wine tool is selected, and then I'm going to click on this, and you can see the selection has been made based on the color on this area. So now I'm going to add to my selection by holding down the Shift key on my keyboard and then select this, and you can see all the areas has been selected. Now one of the things I can do with this selection is, let's say I don't want this background. Let's create a new document, and then I'm going to leave this as pixels, and then the orientation is going to be on portrait, and then I'll click on create. So here we have a new document, and then this document I'm going to fill it with a color. So to do that, I'll make sure my layer is selected. I can equally unlock this layer, and then I'll go to edit and then fill. Here I'm going to click on the drop down and then select color. Let's say I want something like this, and then I'll click OK. My document or my image has been filled. So right now, without selecting, so let's deselect this. So without selecting this, I'm going to go to my move tool and then move this image. I'm going to drag it to this and then bring it to this point. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then try to resize this to a certain level. I'm going to resize this and then bring it over. So now I'm going to click and hold Ctrl 0 to position it on the screen. So right now I want to be able to delete the background, which is white, and then have only the logo. So to do that, I will have to make sure my layer is selected, which is the image on top of this, and then I will go back to my magic wand tool and then try to select. I will add this to the selection tool, and then what I will simply do is that I'm going to click on the little icon here, which is add layer mask, and this will erase or delete every other part except the selected areas. So if I click on this, and here we have it. So this is the simplest way we can have a background removed using the magic wand tool. Hello there and welcome to this movie. In this movie, we are going to explore another type of selection tool in Photoshop. Beside the magic wand tool, we have another selection tool called the quick selection tool, and we can find it right here. So here we have the quick selection tool, or simply by pressing W on your keyboard can quickly select the quick selection tool. In order to demonstrate this, I'm going to bring up an image, and let's say I want to bring in this guy right here, and then I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make selection on this image right here. So now one thing you should notice is that once you have selected the selection tool, you have two important options right here. So plus is to add to your selection, and then this is to subtract your selection. So for this example, I'm going to simply click and drag on the image to make a selection. I'll keep doing that, and here we have it. For any reason you accidentally select areas that you do not want to select, you can simply hold Alt on your keyboard and this will minus from your selection. So if I hold Alt, I can simply minus from the selection or to subtract from the selection. So here we can see that, or you can simply click the minus icon. So I'll keep on making my selection. My selection may not be perfect enough, but this is just to show you how we can use the quick selection tool. So I'm also going to make this area. So I'm going to minus this little detail here. Okay, so if you're okay by the selection, you can do whatever you wish to do with your selection. If I want to duplicate this, after making my selection, I'll first of all click on my move tool and then hold my Alt key, and I can duplicate this as many as possible. So here you can see, and grab that and drag it wherever I want to, and then here it is. I can equally resize this if I want to, and see that equally resize it. And once I think everything is okay, I have to commit my changes, and then I'll go to select and deselect, and here we have it. So this is a basic example of how we can use the quick selection tool in Photoshop. Hi there, and welcome to this movie. In this movie, we are going to look at more advanced selection techniques in Photoshop. Previously, we've looked at basic selection techniques in Photoshop, and now let's explore more advanced techniques. Here we have an image which we have previously used in other selection, but on this movie we are going to look at the focus area, which is a type of selection in Photoshop. So in order to demonstrate this, I will simply go to select and then click on focus area. Now what happens is that Photoshop will automatically detect anything that is not in focus. So in this case, it did a very good job because actually the background was out of focus. And then once I'm okay with this, I can simply click on OK. And here you can see I can continue with my selection. So if I zoom it a bit and then click on any of the selection tool, let's say the quick selection tool, I can either minus, subtract, or add to my selection. In this movie, I'm going to show you the different ways you can retouch images in Photoshop, or the different techniques you can use for retouching images in Photoshop. And the first we are going to consider is the healing brush tool. When it comes to retouching, Photoshop is one of the best tools for image manipulation, retouching, and all of that. So sometimes when you look at the magazines, the publications, it's very difficult sometimes to figure out whether the image has been manipulated or the image has been retouched. So thanks to Photoshop, that Photoshop can actually make you look so natural and retain your beauty. So let's suppose we have an image and we want to remove some detail in that image. For example, the image on the screen right now, we want to remove this lady without harming other details in this image. So but firstly, we want to make sure that we are doing this non-destructively. And what I mean by non-destructively is that I'm going to create a new layer right here. So I'll click on this to create a new layer, and we can rename the layer. So let's rename it, let's just call it retouch. So now every of our retouching techniques that we are going to apply right now will be done on this new layer without affecting the original image. So the first tool we are going to use is the spot healing brush tool. So you can find out on this icon toolbar, so right here, so you can see we have almost all of the tools for retouching right here. So we are going to start with the spot healing brush tool. So if I click on it, you can see a circle that actually resembles the generic brush tool. This is actually a brush and can be resized, so we can actually come here and see that we can increase the size of the brush, or we can use the keyboard shortcuts to increase and reduce the brush size. So before we start removing any detail, we want to make sure that the sample all layers is selected. So I'm going to select it. Now this is very important if you are working on a separate layer, and then make sure your separate layer is selected. So right now I'm going to click on the square bracket to reduce my brush size or to increase my brush size. So I'm going to increase it based on the detail I want to remove, and then I'm going to drag it, click and drag, and here we have it. So it actually samples from the surrounding area, looking for similar details that can be used for the replacement. So you don't have to do anything magic here. Simply paint over your detail and your detail will be removed or replaced. So that is how to use the spot healing brush tool in terms of removing detail from your image. In this movie, we are going to consider another retouching tool in Photoshop, and the tool we are going to consider is called the stamp tool, actually the clone stamp tool. You can equally press S on your keyboard to open up the clone stamp tool. But before we use the clone stamp tool, we want to make sure that we are working non-destructively by opening up a separate layer, and I can rename it. Let's call it retouch one more time, and here we have it. So make sure it's selected, and then I'm going to select the clone stamp tool, and then once it's selected, I want to make sure that the aligned option is also selected, and then the samples, make sure you choose the all layers. Now the clone stamp tool is like the healing brush tool or the brush tool. You can increase it by holding a square bracket on your keyboard, and you can equally reduce the size by also pressing the square bracket on your keyboard. Also, another important thing you need to set before you work with the clone stamp tool is the hardness of your brush. So make sure the hardness of your brush is set to 0 or reduce the hardness so the selection can be perfect. As a matter of fact, why the healing brush tool tends to blend on its environment, the clone stamp tool simply copies and pastes detail on the environment. So in order to demonstrate this, let's say I want this image right here on the left hand side. So I want to have a copy of this right here. So what I'm going to do is that I want to make sure my stamp tool is selected, and then I'm going to click on Alt. I'll hold down Alt and then click somewhere here to get my sample point. So I'm just going to click here, and then I'm going to bring my cursor to this point so I can resample right here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag and then have a copy of it. And here we have it. So this is how the clone stamp tool works in Photoshop. In this movie, we are going to be looking at another retouching tool in Photoshop, which is the liquify tool. Now the liquify tool is an interesting tool in Photoshop, and you can find it on filter, and then here we have it, the liquify, or there is a shortcut on your keyboard by holding Shift, Ctrl and X. So but before we click on the liquify tool, we first need to convert our background layer into a smart filter in order for us to work non-destructively. So to do that, I'm going to click on filter and then convert to smart filter. Click OK, and right now the image has been converted to a smart filter. And then I will go back to filter and then click on the liquify tool. Here on the liquify tool, you can see we have some toolbars on the left side, and then we have some options on the right side. Now if we go to the first tool on the left, here we have the forward warp. Now the forward warp, if I click on it, I can increase the size of my brush or I can reduce the size of my brush. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to click and then push details. And here you can see that if I increase it a bit, then here you can see the forward warp pushing details to any direction that you want, and here we have it. But now if I hold down my Alt key and then push a bit, you can see everything falls down to the original grid. So here you can see everything falls back to the original. You see, here we have it. Or you can simply click on the reconstruct tool, which will actually bring it back to the original. But I like holding down the Alt key and then clicking to reconstruct it back to the original. So if you don't want to use the Alt key, you can click on the reconstruct. And also, let's say you want to forward warp or push this a little bit. You want to push it in a different direction like this. And for whatever reason, after doing this, you discover it's not smooth, you can equally click on the smooth tool. If I click on the smooth tool, then I'm going to increase my brush size a bit, and then you can drag just to smoothen your mesh. Next, so here we have the 12 clockwise tool. So if I click on it, and this is kind of twist things around, you can see that twisting it. And if I want to move on the opposite side, I will hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and then click on it, and here we have it. Next is the poker tool. So if I click on the poker tool and then increase my brush size, the poker tool is a kind of sucks your details. Here you can see kind of sucking your details. And then the opposite of this is a blot tool. So if I click on the blot tool and then increase the brush size, the blot tool kind of pushes details out. Here we can see it in demonstration. Another important tool I would like us to consider is the freeze marks. Now the freeze marks, let's suppose we have a detail like this. Here we see, and we do not want, when we use the forward warp, if we are trying to push in different directions, we do not want it to affect this young man standing on this mountain top. So we don't want it to affect this detail here. So what I will do is I'm going to click on the freeze marks, and then I'm going to select the detail. So this detail right here, I'm going to select it, and then I will go back to the forward warp. Let's suppose we want to push things around, and then as I'm doing this, it doesn't affect detail, the selected detail. So the detail has been freezed. So you can see that it doesn't affect it. The detail has been freezed. And if I want to remove it, I'm going to click on the throw marks. If I click on the throw marks, and then I can remove this, and it comes back to the way it should be. Thank you so much for watching, and in the next lecture I'm going to show you how to work with this with another image. In the last movie, we were able to go through the basic liquify tools in Photoshop. So in this example, I'm going to show you how we can make something like before and after image using the liquify tool. So here I have a man with a big tummy, and I'm going to reduce the tummy using the liquify tool. So the first step is going to filter and then convert to smart filter, and after that conversion I will go back to filter and click on the liquify tool. So I'll click on liquify tool. Now to demonstrate this, you have the option of choosing the forward warp, or you can use the poker tool. So whichever tool works for you, then you can go ahead with it. For example, if I go to the poker tool, and then here you can see is actually shrinking the belly, or I can simply choose the warp tool, and then here on the warp tool I'm going to increase my brush size and then try to shrink it. So you have to do this gently so you don't destroy your image. So I'm going to speed up a little bit, then I'll come back once I'm done. So I'll keep shrinking it until the desired size. Next, I'm going to go to the back, then shrink it a bit. The liquify tool works better when your brush size is bigger. So make sure your brush size is increased. And then here I'm going to use the poker tool. So I'll click on the poker tool and then increase my brush size. So this will kind of shrink the hand. So once you think everything is okay, or you've gotten your desired result, then you can click OK. Wow. So here I have a finished image, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the other one. First of all, I'm going to save this. So I'm going to click on File and then Save As. So here I'm going to save it as JPEG, and let me save it as Biggie_finished. Then I'm going to click OK. Then OK. So right now I'm going to go to File. I'll make a new document. Then I'm going to select a postcard. So I'll select postcard and then leave the orientation as landscape, then click create. So now I have this. So I'm going to go to File and place or bring in the images. So if I go to place, I'll place this. So now I'm going to resize it. Resize it a bit. I don't want to resize it destructively, so I'm going to resize it and drop this over here, and then go to File, Place. So I'm going to bring in the finished one, then right here I'm going to drop it here. I'm going to click on this, then shift it a bit, then bring this backward. So here we have it. We have created a typical example of a before and after image. So there are different ways you can utilize the liquify tool, but this is just a basic example of how to use the tool. In this movie, we are going to look at the content aware in Photoshop. In the earliest version of Photoshop CS5, we have the content aware field, which we can find by going to edit, and then here we have fill. And after that, we had a new technology called a content aware move. Now let's first of all look at how we can use the content aware fill. Now if I go to this image and we want to remove these things that looks like text or these distractions and just leave only the background, so what I will simply do is, first I'm going to make a selection. So you can use the lasso tool or whatever. So for this example, I'm going to use the lasso tool, and then I'm going to make a selection around this. Make a selection. So go and deselect. So I'll make a selection around this. That's around the text. And after the selection, I can simply right click and then click on fill, and then I want to make sure that the content is on content aware, and then I'm going to click on OK. Voila, and here we have it. So I can simply go to select and deselect my selection. So what happens is that Photoshop automatically resamples my image based on its environment. Now, in order to demonstrate the content aware move tool, I'm going to use this image right here. So to find your content aware move tool, I'm going to select this. Here we have the mode and we have extend and move. So for now, I'm going to choose the move mode, and then by default make sure the transform on drop is ticked. Now I'm going to make a selection on this lady. I want to move this lady from here to this edge. So what I'm going to do, I'll just make a selection of it, and after making a selection, then I can drag this to this edge. Now if I click enter or commit my changes, now you notice that Photoshop not only move this lady from this position to this left side, but it also blends in the new environment. So if I go to select and then deselect, and here we have it. So if I go back to what we had earlier, and now I'm going to select the extend and then move this to this edge, and right now if I clicked, before I commit my changes, I can also resize my image. I can resize it a little bit and then maybe drag it somewhere around here, maybe somewhere here or wherever. Let me just bring it somewhere here, and then if I click on enter, so here you can see that it actually makes a copy of this. So that is the difference between the extend and then the move mode. Hello friends, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about working with text in Photoshop. When it comes to typography, Photoshop is not the best tool for it. It's highly recommended to use Adobe InDesign for large projects. Yet, Photoshop has a lot of options when it comes to typography. So, to work with text, we need to grab the type tool on the toolbar. So here we have the type tool. So I'm going to click on it, and by default, the color of my text is set to white. So now I can click on anywhere on the document and start typing. By default, it's going to generate a dummy text called lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is basically used to demonstrate how our text would look like. So now I can simply click on it and delete it, and then enter whatever I wish to type. So I'm going to say Photoshop typography. So just like this. So once I'm done typing, I can simply click to commit my changes. If I want to move my text, I can click on the move tool, click anywhere on the body of the text, and then move the text. Note that once you drop a type on the document, Photoshop will bring up the properties panel where you can make changes to your text. So here I have the option of reducing or increasing the font size. I can simply click on the drop down and select the font size that I want, or I can simply click and drag the mouse to the left or right. So if I move to the right, and you can see that my type is increasing, and then if I move to the left, and you can see that my type is reducing. Another way we can increase or reduce the font size is by going to your keyboard and click and hold Ctrl T, and this will give you an option to resize your text. So now I can resize my text to my preferred size, and once I'm done with it, I will click to save my changes. If I want to change my font style, I can simply click on this box, and here I have the different font style. So if I move my mouse and then select one of that, and here you can see that it has made changes to my font style. So if I'm not comfortable with this, I can simply go back and choose the font style that I want to work with. So if I want to work with Algerian, I will simply click on it, and here we have it. Now if I go back to the type tool, my option bar will be adjusted based on the currently selected tool. So on the option bar, I can equally use that to change my font style, and as well reduce or increase my font size. When you place a text on the document, it's going to be placed horizontally. So if I want to change this to be in the vertical direction, I'll simply click on the text orientation icon, and this will change it to the vertical direction. So if I click again, and it's going to bring it back into horizontal orientation. If I want to define an area type, I'll simply make sure that my text tool is selected, and then I'm going to click and drag my mouse, and this is going to define an area for my text. So if I release my mouse, and automatically this is going to place lorem ipsum or a dummy text on the area. Now I can simply reduce the size, and here we have it. So for any reason I want to make changes or to add to the text, I'll simply click on the text and then continue typing. If I want to bring in more dummy text, I can simply go to the type, and here you can see paste lorem ipsum. So if I click on it, and this is going to paste more text to the area. You also notice that each text you drop on the document is going to create a layer on the layers panel. And if I want to go back and make changes to any of these, for example, I want to make changes to the Photoshop typography, I would simply double click on this, and this will highlight the layers for me, and I can simply click on color to change a color, or I can use the properties panel right here. So if I click on the color here, I can choose, let's say I want it to be red, and I'll click OK, and then make changes to my file. Also, if I want to change the color of a particular text, I'll simply highlight on it and then go to the color, and let's say I want to change this to black. If I click OK, and here we have it. If for any reason you are not seeing the text clearly because it's sitting on this document, I can place a shape so that the text will stand out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the background layer, and then I'll click on the plus icon to make or to create a new layer, and the layer is going to sit on top of this. Now I will go to my shape tool and then select the rectangle tool. Now I'm going to bring a rectangle just like this, and then here you can see that the text is now standing out because we have a layer on top of the background layer. But if I still want to see the background layer, I can simply use the opacity, and then I'll reduce the opacity a bit, and here we have it. Thank you for watching, and in the next lecture we are going to learn more about text formatting in Photoshop.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel for more content on digital technology and programming skills. Stay curious, and I will see you in the next video.